We haven't met yet. My name is Rebecca Pickens. I'm a certified book coach, developmental editor, and host of Self-Editing Essentials. For more information about the way that I support writers, you can check out my links in the comments section. So I want to talk a little bit about metaphor today. I got a question the other day from a writer that I coach who is interested in learning ways to thread more metaphor into her piece of literary fiction. And I just love this question because I think on some level as writers, we all know what metaphor is, but we don't necessarily know how to work with it in a way that feels compelling and authentic and avoids that tendency toward purple prose. And so many writers avoid it because they're just afraid they don't quite know how to work with it. And when we entirely avoid this kind of figurative language, we're missing out on a tool that we can use in really amazing ways. So let's dig in and look at metaphor. So just to refresh our memories, metaphor, very simply stated, is a figure of speech. It's a literary element that we use to describe one thing as if it were another. So it is to think about it really simply, it's a comparison. And we use metaphor to turn abstract, complex ideas into something that will be more tangible for our reader. It helps readers see something that on the surface may be kind of ordinary into something more profound. We see an idea in a brand new way. So, for example, grief is a shadow that won't leave your side. This is a pretty, if you think about it, it is a pretty complicated idea. And this metaphor, it provides a shortcut, a way to think about grief and a way to think about it in terms of kind of relentless and following us, right? We can convey this idea with an economy of words, and that's the power of metaphor. So let's take a look at metaphor in action. We've got this great metaphor in Fitzgerald's novel, The Great Gatsby. So we beat on boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. He's taking a big idea here and helping us digest it pretty efficiently. The boats against the current, of course, represent the human struggle and the pull of the past upon us. It's taking this really abstract idea, which is the difficulty of moving forward, and it's putting it into a vivid, memorable image. To really dig deep into the difficulty of moving forward, he would need a lot more words, and those words may not have the same staying power that this very crisp, um, interesting metaphor has. And so it stays with us as readers. Metaphors, I think the tendency to avoid metaphor in creative writing comes from this fear that it's just frivolity. It's just this purple prose that's there to be ornamental or decorative. But that is not the case. That's a bad metaphor. I mean, metaphors can certainly show up in literature that way. But those aren't the metaphors we're talking about today. A good metaphor reshapes a reader's thinking because it's doing something really profound. A good metaphor has to engage both the logical parts of a reader's brain as well as the emotional parts of a reader's brain. And in doing so, we're creating ideas that are going to last and really resonate with the people who read your stories. And as a writer myself, I find neuroscience and the impact of story on our brains so fascinating. This is one of my rabbit trails that I could go down all day. And maybe I'll talk about that more on this channel at some point because there really is a lot to unpack there. Neuroscience actually shows that metaphor activates sensory and emotional centers in the brain. I mean, think about that. Our whole reason to be as creatives is to impact thought, to impact the emotional landscape of our reader. So, this is a pretty exciting thing to think about. The challenge is, and I've touched upon this a little bit already, is we want to avoid purple prose. We want to know that the metaphor we're creating strengthens rather than clutters the scene. We want to avoid cliches that feel tired or forced. And that means most metaphors that you've seen before probably don't belong in your story. The shadow metaphor, the grief metaphor that I opened with, you probably don't want that to pop up in your book because we've seen it so many times before. Metaphor should be fresh and new and interesting to get your reader's attention. We want to make sure our metaphors are infused with meaning, not just a bunch of pretty words strung together. So when do we want to use metaphors? Well, we want to use them sparingly. We want to be really mindful about the usage. We use them to introduce abstract concepts through concrete imagery. We want to highlight emotional beats or turning points in our story with metaphor. We can use metaphor to reinforce themes subtly without hitting the reader over the head. So you can think about it like this. You want to use your metaphor for the moments that you want to spotlight most. A metaphor slows down the reader a little bit and makes them go, "Oh, this is clearly important. This is kind of a weird way of saying this. This is piquing my curiosity. Let me linger here a minute more and think about what this interesting figurative language is trying to show me." Another example of a metaphor in action comes from The Night Circus. The circus arrives without warning. No announcements precede it, no paper notices on Downtown Post. It is simply there, when yesterday it was not. The reason that this metaphor works is that the circus is really a metaphor for wonder and magic and possibility as it turns up in ordinary life. It transforms this really kind of abstract feeling of enchantment and it puts it into a tangible image that we can understand, but that also captures our imagination. It's helpful to think about metaphor in terms of three types. The first is conceptual. A conceptual metaphor really explains abstract ideas, such as time is a thief. A symbolic metaphor tends to reflect on themes instead. So you might have a storm, and the storm is supposed to be indicative of inner turmoil within one of your characters. And then we have an extended metaphor, and I actually just gave you an example of an extended metaphor in that last slide. The idea of the circus is an example of how we can carry metaphor through a scene. Another example is a journey. A journey can be, you might have a road trip story. Those are really popular right now. And the road trip story can represent, it can be a metaphor for the emotional growth that the characters in your story undergo. So, how do we craft metaphor that's going to resonate? How do we make sure that our metaphors aren't just going to clutter the page and feel showy? There's a step-by-step approach that I recommend. The first is anchor your idea in experience. Find images that are rooted in common life experience that your readers are going to recognize as well. Then connect with that specific emotion that you're striving to connect with. Metaphor should really reflect a feeling, not just the object that you're describing. And then layer in lots of meaning. Can it hint at a theme in your story or foreshadow certain events? And lastly, and this is really important from a stylistic perspective, simplify. Avoid overcomplicating. You want to go for clarity over cleverness. Even in the metaphors that I used in my example slides, they are suggestive of some pretty profound ideas, some complex thinking, but they are clear. So here's an example from Toni Morrison's novel, Beloved. Love is or it ain't. Thin love ain't love at all. So here she has anchored a universal experience, love. It's emotionally charged for the reader. We feel that difference between thin and thick love. We've probably never thought about it in those terms before. It's kind of unusual, right? She's really taking a concept and doing something unique that's all hers. But it's such a good image because we get it. We just intuitively get it. And a good metaphor is going to layer meaning, in this case, about what love costs and how it shapes identity. It's a simple, powerful phrasing that lingers. We can read these lines once and they're going to stick with us. They have clarity, they're concise, and so they resonate. So if this is interesting to you and you want to play with metaphors some more, go ahead and visit the link that I put in the comments section. It's a freebie that provides a little cheat sheet on ways to craft sophisticated metaphor that has texture and layer and nuance to it. It will just make the whole process a lot more thought-provoking for you as a writer and help you craft some metaphors that really land the ideas that you want to land with your readers.